Welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. Today we are on block 11 of our sampler quilt tutorials. And I'm really excited about it because we'll be finished at the end of the month and we'll be able to start putting our quilt tops together, which will be a lot of fun. This block that we're going to be doing today is called Virginia Reel, R-E-E-L, and this is going to be one of the few different ways of putting together flying geese. There's a few different ways you can paper piece them. They have tools like the creative grid rulers. There's one for flying geese. And there's a couple different methods to do them without the rulers and then squaring them up at the end. So this is just one of the ways, and we're going to do that today. So, let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to cut out, where's my paper? You're going to cut out one dark and one light, 7 1/4 inch squares of each. And then you're going to cut out 4 squares of the dark and 4 squares of the light, measuring 3 7/8. So there isn't a lot of cutting to do. And what I do is I take my squares and I just stack all 4 together. And then you're going to take a ruler and you're going to cut these in half diagonally. Okay. Just like that. And so then you'll end up with 8 of each of your colors of these triangles. Then, with your larger ones, now if you don't have a turntable, that's fine. Just kind of lay your larger squares, the 7 1/4 inch squares, just lay them kind of like in a diamond because it makes it easier to move your ruler both ways. So we're going to cut it diagonally this way, and we're not going to move the fabric, and then we're going to put our ruler and we're going to cut it diagonally the other way. Now when you do this, you don't want your ruler to be like perfectly right exactly on the corner of each one, because if it's exactly sitting on that corner, one side's going to be a little, just a hair larger than the other side. So you want it just a sliver to the opposite side. So if I was to put it right on the end, I'm going to cut just a sliver over because it has to go against the ruler. So I'm going to line my ruler up just a hair to the side of that point on each end. Not a lot, just a little tiny bit. And just double check. Once you move one end, the other end of your ruler tends to want to move. And so you will cut it. Whoops. And I went and moved my ruler on myself, which happens. So I just realign it. And then once you get that aligned, you'll go ahead and make your cut, and without moving your fabric, lift your ruler up and put your ruler in the other direction, line it up, and make your next cut. I've already cut those, so I'm just going to set those aside out of my way. So with these, you might even do one practice one to see how your measurements are coming out. I always recommend, this is one of those designs that if your measurements don't match up, when you go to square things up, they're not going to square up. And each section that we make, we will need to square it up so that they will line up to each other, so that we can get our point at the top, right here, and up here, and when we put our sides together. So you want to make sure that you're getting accuracy. So the way to do that, go back and review my tutorial on the I'm trying to think of the name of it, and it just went out of my head. On the scant quarter inch. I don't know what's wrong with me today. It's always stuck on the edge of my tongue whenever I'm trying to teach. So I don't know why it went out of my head today. I think because I was doing my needle turn tutorial earlier, and my head's not quite shifted over yet. Okay, so you want to go back on YouTube and on our YouTube channel here and check for the scant quarter inch if you're unsure how to do that. And all that you're doing with a scant quarter inch is you're moving your needle over twice to the right. And so for me, I'm using the quarter inch guide foot, which has your little piece here that you can guide your fabric up against. If you're using your regular straight stitch foot, and you're using your plate for your guide of a quarter inch, same thing, you're just going to move your needle from a straight stitch over 2 times to the right, and just, once again, just stay lining up on your quarter inch, and you'll get your scant quarter inch. And what in the tutorial for that, what I recommended was taking 3 scrap pieces of fabric, cut them like 1.5 inch wide or 2.5 inch wide. You might have some left over from a project or whatever. Sew those 3 pieces together with your quarter inch seam, and then press them open your seams and press them, and then measure that middle piece and see if it is an accurate measurement. And if it's not, then you need to be sewing in the scant quarter inch. Different machines are different, but the whole purpose of the scant quarter inch is because your thread takes up a space and your fold takes up a space. That's why we move our needle twice over, so that we can get a more accurate seam or piecing. Now, if when you measure it's still not accurate, you may need to move your needle over one more time, but usually that's not true. Usually it's just the 2 times so that you get an accurate measurement. So check that out and make sure with some scrap fabric before you make these, because these will need to be a little more accurate so that as you're putting them together, everything is going to line up well. So let's go ahead and get started on these, and we'll go from there. I'm just going to move the camera over a little bit so that you can see more of what I'm doing. So we have our larger triangles and our smaller triangles. Now, some of you may have seen flying geese made where they use a square on each side and fold it over and then trim. That's not how we're going to do them today. Let me find the right sides of my fabric. There we go. Because these white ones, I can barely see the design on them, but one side's definitely a right side. Okay. So we'll do this one first. Now, it doesn't matter which side you start on, but if you decide to start your first pieces on the right, you want to do all of your larger triangles on the right side. If you choose to start on the left, just do them all on the left. And I usually chain piece. It just makes it quicker work as I'm going. I've done my other pieces, but I will show you with this one once I get this lined up right. So you're going to line your piece up, and you're going to have an overhang at the top, which is going to be your dog ear that we will trim off afterward. So you want to line up this triangle and this. Am I getting that? Let me move this up here. There we go. You want to line up this triangle so that this side matches up with the bottom and this side matches up to the side. And like I said, you're going to have a little bit of an overhang up here. That's perfectly fine. And we're going to do a 1/4 of an inch or a scant 1/4 of an inch seam from the very top all the way to the very bottom of this piece. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and you can clip it or pin it at the bottom to keep it from shifting on you. I really don't with pieces this size. I just hold them, I'll hold my bottom and sew it along. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one. And I started all mine on the right side, so I'm going to continue to sew them on the right side first. And to chain piece it, I'm just going to sew to the end when it's right at the very end of my piece. And I'll show you what I mean. I gotta find the right side of this. There we go. Oh, wrong way. Wrong way. So what I did was I sewed all the way until I was about a needle space from the end and left my needle down. That way I can insert my next piece and just chain piece these along. And when you start, you can chain piece all of the right sides of your larger triangles first, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next. So after I've chain pieced all my pieces together, they'll be kind of linked together like this. And I'm just going to trim off my bottom thread, and then I will trim the, clip the thread between them, and then the thread at the beginning. Okay. Whoops, getting in the way of the camera here, but I need to switch over to my wool mat. And so then you're just going to press to set your stitching, and then I take my fingers and I run it along that stitching on the inside here, and then fold it over and just finger press it a little bit. Don't stretch it. When your fabric is heated up, it's more stretchy, so you don't want to stretch it. And then just press. And normally I use my quilter's clapper to get it set better. And we're going to trim that dog ear at the top. Now it's okay if that isn't perfectly lined up, because we will be squaring them up after. I just want to get the dog ear off the top because it will get it out of the way so it doesn't become part of the next seam. So do the same thing to each one of your pieces. Press them, finger press them open, and then press it. And once again, I'm going to clip my dog ear. Off the side there. That just gets it out of the way so it doesn't create a lot of bulk up at the point. So then I'm going to take my next two pieces, and now I'm going to line them up. Wait a minute, I got to check and see which side was my right side here, so I get it lined up right. So now you will line up your other side the same way, making sure that you're lined up on the bottom. Your point on the corner is lined up, and that this side here, the long side, is lined up. And it will overhang over the top just like it did before. And you're going to stitch all the way from the bottom all the way to the top, and you want to even go past. Don't stop where you see your seam. Go all the way until you get off your fabric here in this corner. And then I'll line up my other one. Okay. And same thing, I went until I was right on the very edge, about a thread space from the end, and left my needle down so that way I can have to reline that up. I moved it a little bit when I was bringing it over. That way you can put your next piece in and chain stitch. do the same thing. I'll clip my threads. Okay, and I'm going to press and then press it open. Might have to move my thing down just a little bit. There we go. So I've already pressed to set my stitches. I'm just going to run my fingernails up against that seam and press it open. You want to make sure that it's nice and open and not rolled over so that you get a nice point at the top. And then just press it. Now, I'm not going to worry about my dog ears, trimming them off now, because when I square these up, those dog ears are going to come off. We just did it on one side at the top so that it wouldn't create a bulky point, because then our points wouldn't look nice. So do that with each one of your pieces. Okay. So now we're going to square these up. And these need to be squared up, because see how this is popped up a little bit above right here? It's a little higher. We need this to be nice and straight so that when we put our pieces together, if I was to put this together like this, it would not come out straight. It would come out crooked. So we've got to square these up. And to do that, I'm going to do this side first, because I know I have a nice straight piece on the bottom here of my larger triangle. And I need these to be 3.5 inches wide this way, and then 6.5 from side to side going this way. So I'm going to do the 3.5 first, because I have that perfect straight edge down here. And I'm going to line that bottom up with the 3.5 mark on my ruler all the way across, and make sure that it's lined up. Move my camera down just a little bit. And so I want that to be lined up, and whatever excess is on this edge, I'm going to trim off. Now that's still not quite perfectly straight up there. I think I had, oh, maybe it's because of how I pressed it actually. Yeah, I think it's because of how I pressed it. But I'll show you when we put them together how I can fix that so it's going to come out straight. Now, because that bottom is straight, this is a 6.5 inch wide ruler. So I know that my center is 3.25 inches. And with the Creative Grid ruler, it has the markings for me. So it shows my center point on my ruler. And it has a line that goes across this way and a line that goes across this way to show me my center of my ruler. And because I need this piece to be exactly 6.5 inches, I am going to line up that center line. I'm going to line up the bottom with a straight line on my ruler, and then I'm going to line up that center line into the very center of my point up here. And once I have that correctly lined up, I'm going to trim both sides. I'm just double checking to make sure that I have it right. It's always good to check twice before you cut. And you're only going to be taking the sliver off of each side. Now I have a rotating mat. If you don't, you can just turn your piece and then line it up again and square up your other side. So that piece is squared up. Now if you don't have a 6.5 inch wide ruler, let me grab the 6-inch ruler and I'll show you how we would do it. Now first I'm going to do my first squaring up at 3.5 inches, just like I did before, and double check, make sure that all the way across the bottom that you're lined up at the 3.5. I'm not worried about this edge, this end, or that end, because I know that they're not squared up. I'm only caring about the very long bottom of that larger triangle because I know that I cut that straight. So I'm going to line up my 3.5 inch mark all the way across that bottom, and then I will trim off the excess on the top. And it's just a little sliver. I'm not taking off a lot, just a little sliver off the top. And how much comes off the top just depends on, you know, the last one I didn't take very much off, but it's also not perfectly straight at the top. But when I match these up to each other, I'm going to make sure that my bottoms and my sides line up so that I'll get this straightened out. And I'll show you how I do that after. So if you don't have a 6.5 inch ruler, I had to go hunt over on my wall and find one that was 6 inches. And so what you would do is, I know that 3.25 inches is half of 6.5 inches. And I need this to measure 6.5 inches. So what I would do is I would find my 3.25 mark on my 6-inch ruler. I want to make sure that my bottom lines up on a straight line, on a straight line. And then I want to find my quarter mark, which is right here. And I double check, make sure that you have the bottom lined up. Now I'm not going to trim mine with this ruler, because once you square something up with one ruler, you want to consistently do each piece with the same ruler. So I'm not going to trim it with this, but I wanted you to see, if you didn't have a 6.5 inch wide ruler to do your squaring up, I can still do it with my 6-inch ruler. I just want to make sure that I have a straight line lined up on my bottom, and at my point I'll want to be at the 3.25, right on my point. So you would line that up, and then you would make your trim on this side. Then just flip your ruler around like this, and you would square up, you would line up your bottom on a straight line, find your 3.25, line that up with the center, and then trim this side. And then both sides will be trimmed. Now you can see that there's a big overhang over here because that's my extra 1/2 inch. So I squared up this side, then I turned my ruler and then squared up the other side. So once again, I'm going to show that to you one more time just to make sure that it's clear. So I'm squaring up my right side first. I'm making sure that my bottom longest part of my triangle is on a straight line on my ruler. Then I'm finding my 3¼ mark, and I'm making sure that mark is centered right at the point up there, still straight on my line down here, and I would trim my right side. Then I will totally not turn my, well, you could turn, anyway, it's easier this way just to keep it simple. I'm going to turn my ruler, once again, line the bottom up on a straight line. I'm going to find my 3 from that side, and 1/4. Probably makes more sense to have it down this way because I have my 1, 2, 3, and then there's my 1/4, and I have it lined up so I can see my 3 and 1/4. Make sure that that 1/4 after the 3 is right centered with your point and your triangle, and that it's still straight on the line down here, and then you would trim the left side. So that's how you would use your 6-inch ruler. If that's all that you have, it's still doable. It's not a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and trim mine up with my 6½ inch wide ruler, just because that's what I've been using for my other ones. And I'm going to line up my bottom with that. Make sure my 3¼ mark is centered, which, like I said, it shows you the center there. I just want to make sure it's all straight. And then I will do my trimming on this one and square it up. And you're not taking off a lot on each side, or shouldn't be taking off a lot on each side. And I double check, even though I spin this and I feel like I haven't moved my ruler, I double check, make sure everything stayed lined up, and then I'll do my trim on that side. And like I said, you're not taking off a lot. Just this little bit came off the other side. Not very much at all. It just squares it up so that it's going to be lined up well. So on the Virginia reel, our top pieces, after we line them up, are going to go like this. And then our other piece is going to go like this. I just wanted to show you something real quick. Something else that you can do with these blocks. So my next one will be pointing in that direction. So each one of your points is going in the, towards the outside, pointing towards the outside of the block. So you'll have your flying geese that way, this way, and so forth. But another thing that you can do, well, I'll leave this over here just for a visual. Another thing that you could do with these is you could put them together. Let me move that back so that you can see what I'm doing. So you could put them together like this, and you would have your square in a square. And you could put 4 of those together and come out with the same size 12½ unfinished square. Or you could do one this way, one flying geese, then you could do a square and a square up here and a flying geese down this way, and you would have an entirely different block. So once you've made your separate pieces, there are different ways, to put them together so that you can create other blocks with them. And I like to show you those kinds of things because as we see other blocks, we'll start to recognize steps that we've done before, and they won't look so scary. If I can break a block up, like when I see someone else's quilt or I see a block online that I like, the more that I quilt, the more that I piece quilts, the more that I can see the techniques that are used in each one of them to put them together. And I can see different ways to change them up to create different quilts all on my own, sometimes even without a pattern. So I'm trying to point these types of things out like I did with the last one that we did last month, block 10 and so forth. I like to point that out because it will make it easier for you as you go through. Sometimes you won't even need a pattern. You could take some of the blocks that we've done and you could mix them up and create your own quilts. So that's just another thing that you could do if you wanted to. It doesn't always have to be my way or the exact patterns way. You'll start to see how you can change things up and do things your own way. So, for this pattern, what we're doing is we have your darker ones your darker triangles going to be on top, and your lighter triangle is going to be on the bottom. So we're putting our two flying geese together. So now that I have them lined up this way, I'm just going to flip this over so it's right side to right side. And I'm going to line up all 4 of my corners. I'm going to be stitching, so I'm going to unfold this again. Wait a minute. Put this back down here. When I flip it over, I want to remember that I'm going to be sewing across this way. So my piece will be like this going into my sewing machine. I'm going to do a 1/4 of an inch or a scant 1/4 of an inch from this edge all the way down to the very end on this side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up each one of my corners because I want these to line up really well to each other. And I know that the bottom of my triangle is straight. So I'm going to line up each corner, and I'm not sewing on this side, but I'm going to line it up so that as I'm sewing, I don't have a shifting happen. And also because your feed dogs move your bottom fabric at a different rate, just slightly, than the top fabric. So by clipping or pinning, I am making sure that it's not going to shift, and when I get to the end, my bottom isn't going to be shorter than my top. So then I'm going to clip this bottom edge here. And I'm going to clip it in the center. And I'm even going to put a clip over here, even though that's where I'm going to start sewing. And that's just going to help keep everything lined up until I take it to my sewing machine, which I'm going to do now. So that one that I flipped over, I'm going to be sewing on the side where the point is. And I'm going to do my scant 1/4 of an inch going down all along this edge. Now when I'm piecing pieces together like this, I do some extra clipping that sometimes I don't do if I'm just sewing a couple squares together or whatever, because I need them to line up a little bit better because I want my points to come out nice. Now when you're done, you should be able to see your point at that top. This should not be rolled over the point so it's cut off. You should be able to fully see your point, but you also should not be seeing extra fabric from that seam at the above your point. So let's go ahead and press this. I'm going to set my stitches first. Now, as you go along and you practice, things are going to line up better and better each time. But just like with anything, piecing takes some practice. Now, you want to finger press this open so that you don't have this rolled over. If this is rolled over, it's going to look flat up here instead of a point up here. So you want to make sure that you have it nicely opened up. You don't want to stretch your fabric, but just finger press with your fingernail going across, making sure that your seam on the bottom is staying flat. And we're going to press our seam going toward the dark piece up at the top. And remember, don't iron. You want to press. Ironing stretches the fabric because as the fabric gets heated up, it has the likelihood to stretch, and we don't want to do that. We want to be setting the weave of the fabric by pressing. Okay, so that's my piece put together, and this creates one of my corner blocks. So I already sewed these two pieces together. Now my next two pieces, and you can just use your picture to go by. This piece is going to be going down, and this piece is going to be pointing in the other direction. So it's almost like a spinner going around. So I'm just going to take this piece and I'm going to fold it over so it goes right side to right side, and I'm going to be doing my scant 1/4 of an inch going down this side of it. So I'm just going to clip the bottom of it, or you can use pins, whichever one works better for you. And I even do a clip down here just because I want this to stay lined up. And I'm going to do a clip down this bottom over here. I just want to make sure that my stuff stays lined up. It's a little bit, it doesn't take that much longer to do those 2 extra clips. So now make sure that you sew from the very end to the very end. And you want to keep it nice and straight as you're sewing it. So now I will go ahead and set my stitches. I'm going to press this open. Now, in looking at my seams, if I was to roll it this way, it's going to be very bulky. Now, normally we would press toward the dark side, but we only have one little piece that's dark here anyways. It's not going to matter. I'm going to press it towards that side because it's going to keep my, let me check. If in doing that, if I'm correct. Yeah. So I'm going to press it towards that side because that's going to keep my seam, I went the wrong way, mind you. That's going to keep my seam nice and flat. And it's not going to be bulky. And as I go across, I just lift my iron and press. And then I like to check my back side to make sure that when I press that my seam stayed nice and flat and I didn't roll it over as I was pressing it. Okay. So now I have my two pieces like this. If all went well, as you were putting these together, you will have created another point down here from these two pieces on this corner. And the same with the top one. You will have created another point here. And you want those to line up well so that as you're putting these seams together that they're going to match up. Now the way that because of the way that we press them, we have one seam that's going in this direction and this seam is going in that direction. And that will help them to butt up against each other when we're putting them together. So I'm going to take my top piece and I'm going to fold it over my bottom piece, right sides together. I'm going to put a clip on my end down here to line up my corners. Whoops. Need to put that on there just a little bit better. And then I'm going to take my two pieces here, and where I have my seams going in opposite directions, I'm going to put them up against each other and butt them up against each other. And I'm going to feel with my fingers to make sure that they're pressed up against each other, that my sides are even. And for this, I do pin with a clip. You might not get it right dead on where you want it. And I'm wanting to make sure that my pin is sitting right in that seam. Not over one way or the other. I want it right in that seam. And you can get it right in the points that you created on those edges. So when I open it up, I can see that my pin here is centered. And I'm going to readjust that just a little bit, because I want that pin to be right at the top of that corner in the seam, and I want the same thing on this side. And I'm just going to feel with my fingers and make sure that that's nice and straight and that they're butted up against each other. And then I will clip here between those two just to keep this lined up as I'm sewing across. I'll line up this corner down here and put in a clip or a pin, and the same in the center again. Whoops, I moved that over. So now I'm going to sew my scant 1/4 of an inch from this end all the way across down to this end. Now if you want, you can even secure your bottom corners with a clip just to keep everything together so it's not shifting on you as you're moving it around and getting it over to your machine. Now some of that probably depends on how much extra room. So I've got my pieces butted up against each other in the center, and I've got it nicely clipped, and I'm going to do my seam. What? And I sew until I'm close to my pin near that seam so that it's holding it together. You could even put a little temporary glue before you pin it in that seam so it stays together better when you take your pin out. Because the temporary glue will wash out when you wash your quilt. Now it all went well, my points will all match up to each other, and it will look nice. We'll see what happens. So, I'm going to set my stitches first. And then I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to finger press, and I kind of hold my seam underneath on the bottom so I know that it's staying, all my seam is going in the same direction as I'm finger pressing it, because when your seams are getting a little bulkier, they'll tend to want to roll one direction or the other on you. So now I've got that finger pressed. I'm going to go ahead and, let me see, that one. It's not laying as nicely as I want it to. There we go. So when you have a bulky seam, like right here, I can feel it's a little bulky, and in this center, I can feel that it's a little bulky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my quilter's clapper, and the reason for the quilter's clapper is because it's hardwood. It's made specifically for this. The hardwood absorbs the heat and holds it down into the fabric, and the wool mat also is balancing that heat from top to bottom. Now if it's still bulky afterward, I can apply a little more heat, and you can actually clap it a little bit and hold it on there, let it cool down, and then move to the other side of it. Now sometimes if you have depending on what you're making, if you have bulky seams, sometimes you have to do that maybe a couple times. Whoops. And I just press down, and then I leave it there. And afterward, I will go through and I will best press my piece, and I will repress each section of my block, so that way I get it nice and flat everywhere. And that is our Virginia reel. Let me move this up just a tiny bit. I think that came out real nice. I'm excited about it. I really like this block. It's really not all that hard to make. I know that you'll hear stories from people about how they had to make so many flying geese for quilts that they dread them. And that's true with any type of a block that you've had to put a lot of them together. It can become drudgery. But this was, to me, a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't mind making an entire quilt with these. You could either make multiple blocks of these and put them side by side, and that would create a sub-design next to each other. Or you could put whole blocks between them. So this is 12.5 inches. You could put either the dark fabric or the light fabric in between and cut those into squares. You could do sashing between your blocks, and that would create a whole different design. There's a lot of ways, and we'll be discussing that a little bit more this month later on as we're getting closer to putting our blocks together. And since we made different blocks each time, it's going to look a little bit different when we put them together anyways. And so we'll be going over that. I don't remember the exact date right now. I'd have to look at my calendar, but that's coming up where we're going to start looking at how to square our blocks up and playing with them and seeing how we want them to go together. And each person may do them differently. Some people may want them to go in order of how that they made them in. Some will want to move them around and play with them. That's all the fun and creativity that goes into a quilt and makes each of our quilts individual. The choices of our fabric, you could all make the same exact quilt and have such a variety that ends up coming out at the end, depending on the choices that we make. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial today. This is block number 11 called Virginia Reel. Please give us a like on our video and subscribe to our Seaside Quilting Supplies YouTube channel. And if you click on the little bell that's right next to the subscribe button, you can change it to all, and then when our next block comes out, you'll be immediately notified about it. And also, I will be having needle turn come out tomorrow, needle turn applique rather come out tomorrow, and some other, lots more tutorials are coming up the rest of this year. So changing your notifications to all makes it easy so that you don't have to remember to come back and look and see if we've done anything new recently. You'll just get notified, and you can decide if you want to watch that one or not when you get the notification. Also, if you haven't seen us on Facebook, every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we do a Notions and Fabric Sale Live, where we show you the items and you get to see them, which is really kind of nice. It's like having a home shopper for you. We put three yard fabric bundles together. We have sales, we have notions, thread, rulers, all kinds of things. And we switch it up each week. Every other Sunday, we at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, we show our newer fabrics and sometimes have sales on those days as well. We put up a calendar on our Facebook page so that you can see what dates and what times our things are, our different live events and so forth. And You can find that by going to Facebook and searching for Seaside Quilting Supplies LLC, and you'll see our business page. And we also have a group of participants, our customers and whatnot, that gather together, and you can just click on group, answer some questions, agree to abide by the rules, which basically our rules are to be kind to each other, and those are pretty simple rules. If you don't answer the questions and accept the rules when you ask to join the group, you'll be denied. And that's to ensure that bots don't try to join our group and cause havoc. So we hope to see you at our lives. We hope that you'll be watching our tutorials. And if you have any questions, please comment. And I try to check at least once or twice a week and see if we have any comments, questions that people might have. And I wish you happy sewing.